Hi poetry lovers, welcome to my channel Bella Poetry Presents. In this segment we will talk about another Victorian female poet, Charlotte Turner Smith. Charlotte Turner Smith was born on May 4, 1749 in London. She was baptized on June 12 as the oldest child of well-to-do Nicholas Turner and Anne Towers. Smith received a typical girl's education in a wealthy late 18th century family. Her childhood, unfortunately, was marked by her mother's early death and her father's reckless spending. After losing his wife, Nicholas Turner traveled, and the children were raised by her mother's sister, whose name was Lucy Towers. It's not known when the father returned to London. But at the age of 6, Charlotte went to school and took drawing lessons from the painter George Smith. 2 years later, she, her aunt, and her sister moved to London, where she attended a girls' school in Kensington and learned dancing, drawing, music, and acting. She loved to read, and she loved also to write poetry. Her father greatly encouraged her. She even submitted a few of the poems to the Ladies' Magazine for publication, but unfortunately the poems were not accepted. Nicholas Turner met with financial difficulties on his return to England, and he had to sell some of the family's holdings. He married a wealthy Henrietta Meryton in 1765. His daughter entered society at the age of 12, leaving the school and being homeschooled, tutored at home. His reckless spending forced his daughter to marry too early. In a marriage on February 23, 1765, at the age of 15, she was given by her father to a violent man whose name was Benjamin Smith. He was the son of Richard Smith, a wealthy West Indian merchant and a director of the East Indies India Company. The marriage proposal was accepted for her by her father. Condemning his action 40 years later, Smith said that it had turned her into a legal prostitute, because obviously she understood that her father sold her to a rich man. But the Smith had 12 children in spite of a very, very unhappy marriage. The first child died in 1767, 1 year after his birth. And then the second child was born, Benjamin Burney, and he only lived 10 years. Basically, 8 of their children outlived Charlotte. The Smith marriage, as I mentioned before, was very unhappy. She detested living in a commercial Cheapside. The family later moved to Southgate and Tottenham, and she argued with her in-laws a lot. She considered them unrefined and uneducated. They, in turn, mocked her for spending time reading, writing, and drawing. Meanwhile, Benjamin proved himself to be a violent and unfaithful man who wasted all his money on gambling. Actually, the only person that really appreciated her writing abilities was her father-in-law, Richard. But some of the appreciation came from him wanting her to use them to further his business interests. Richard Smith owned a plantation in Barbados, which provided the income of 2,000 £2,000 a year, which was not a bad amount of money. And this money Charlotte Smith and her family lived on. Smith would later criticize slavery in works such as The Old Manor House that she published in 1793 and Beachy Head, published in 1807. She persuaded Richard to set Benjamin up as a gentleman farmer in Hampshire and lived with him from 1774 until 1783 at Lee's farm that was located 10 miles east of Winchester. Worried about Charlotte's future and that of his children, and concerned that his son would continue his responsible way and gamble the money away, Richard Smith willed most of his property to Charlotte's children. However, he drew up the will himself, and it had some legal problems. The inheritance originally worth £36,000, which was a very large sum at that time, was tied up in chancery after his death in 1776 for about 40 years, and Smith and her children saw little of it. In fact, Benjamin illegally spent at least a third of the legacy and ended up in King's Bench Prison, a debtor's prison, in December 1783. He spent 7 months there, and Charlotte actually accompanied him to the prison, which was, in my view, strange because their marriage was so bad, but she did. And it was there that she published her first work, Elegiac Sonnets, in 1784. And this first work of these beautiful sonnets achieved instant success, which allowed Charlotte to pay for their release from prison. Smith revised elegiac poems several times over the years, eventually creating a 2-volume work. The family lived in France. They went to France after a while, following their release, and then came back to London. However, Charlotte Smith finally left her good-for-nothing husband, Benjamin Smith, in 1787, 22 years after their marriage. She took her children, after 22 years of marriage, she took her children and separated from him to escape the abusive behavior, financial recklessness, and mounting debts. Subsequently, she had to support her family through her work as a writer. Her first novel, Emmeline, or The Orphan of the Castle, published in 1788, was very successful. It was followed by her second novel called Ethelinde, or The Recluse of the Lake, in 1789, and her third novel, Desmond, appeared in 1792. In 1793, she published her best work, The Old Manor House. Altogether, she published 11 novels in 12 years. And it's really, I think it's truly amazing. She was an amazing woman, in spite of having to support all the children by herself. She wrote and wrote and wrote. And at that time, they didn't just go on the computer and they, typed the stories. She had to write them by hand and edit them and submit them. So I give Charlotte Smith tremendous credit. After 1798, Smith began writing in less politically charged genres than previously. This included a collection of tales, Letters of a Solitary Wanderer, and the play What Is She, published in 1799. Her most successful foray was into children's books. So not only she wrote beautiful sonnets, beautiful poetry, 11 novels, but she also wrote children's books. Rural Walks, that was published in 1795, Rambles, Farther, published in 1796, Minor Morals, published in 1798, and Conversations Introducing Poetry, published in 1804. And on top of everything, she also wrote 2 volumes of a history of England that was published in 1806. Amazingly prolific writer, but in spite of all these works that she published, in 1803, Smith was poverty-stricken. She could barely afford food or coal. She even sold her beloved library of 500 books to pay off debts, but feared being sent to jail for the remaining 20 pounds. Smith complains of gout for many years. Some people think that it wasn't gout, that was actually rheumatoid arthritis, which made it increasingly difficult and painful for her to write and hold a pen in her hand. By the end of her life, it had almost paralyzed her. She wrote to a friend that she was literally vegetating, for I have very little locomotive powers beyond those that appertain to a cauliflower. On February 23rd, 1806, her husband died in debtor's prison, and Smith finally received some money that he owed her, but she was too ill to do anything with it. She died at Tilford a few months later after her husband, on 28th of October 1806, and she was buried at Stoke Church, Stoke Park, near Guildford. The lawsuit over her father-in-law estate was settled 7 years later, on April 22nd, 1813, more than 36 years after her father-in-law's, Richard Smith's, death. Stuart Curran, an editor of Smith poems, has written that she is the first poet in England whom, in retrospect, we would call romantic. She helped shape the pattern of thought and conventions of style for the period and was responsible for rekindling the sonnet form in England. She influenced romantic popular poets of her time, such as William Wordsworth and John Keats. Wordsworth, the leading romantic poet, believed that Smith wrote with true feeling for rural nature at a time when nature was not much regarded by English poets. And today she is being recognized as one of the greatest romantic poets. And I will read a couple of her sonnets. From the French. "Oh, say," the fair Louisa cried, "say where the abode of love is found." "Pervading nature," I replied, "his influence spreads the world around. When morning's arrowy beams arise, he sparkles in the enlivening ray, and blushes in the glowing skies when rosy evening fades away. The summer winds that gently blow, the flocks that bleed along the glades, the nightingale that soft and low with music fills the listening shades, the murmurs of the silver surf, all echo love's enchanting notes, from violets lurking in the turf, his balmy breath through ether floats. From perfumed flowers and dewy leaves, delicious scents he bids exhale. He smiles amid autumnal sheaves, and clothes with green the grassy vale. But when the throne the god assumes, where his most powerful influence lies, 'tis on Louisa's cheek he blooms, and lightens from her radiant eyes. Just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sonnet. And let me see, maybe I'll read to you one more. So this sonnet is called On Passing Over a Dreary Tract. Here it is. My screen jumps. It's hard to catch it. Okay, here we go. Swift fleet the billowiest clouds along the sky. Earth seems to shudder at the storm aghast, while only beings as forlorn as I court the chill horrors of the howling blast. Even round your crumbling walls, in search of food, the ravenous owl forgoes his evening flight, and in his cave within the deepest wood, the fox eludes the tempest of the night. But to my heart congenial is the gloom, which hides me from a world I wish to shun, that scene where ruin saps the mouldering tomb, suits with the sadness of a wretch undone. Nor is the deepest shade the keenest air. Black as my fate, as cold as my despair. Beautiful. So this segment about Charlotte Turner Smith came to an end. I hope you learned and you enjoyed her poetry and listening and learning about her life. Have a wonderful day. Don't forget to like and to subscribe. Bye-bye.